the post-spring rankings that have come out over the last week or so, including On3's Andy Staples. I'll just run them down here. On3's Andy Staples has Michigan number 17. CBS Sports has Michigan 16. USA Today has Michigan at 15. And Joel Klatt, the most optimistic of all of them, Fox Sports analyst who has his own podcast, which does monster numbers. And he ran down all the teams on his post-string top 25 on his pod. He's got Michigan at 12. And so it's kind of similar to what we saw from Michigan in the way too early rankings. Do they matter? Do they not? Not really, but these are some of the people that will be voting in the AP poll as the season unfolds. And so their voices aren't completely irrelevant because those are notable enough to discuss at different points. So your thoughts on that? I guess, 12 would probably put you just on the outside of the playoff. The other ones, 15, 16, 17, puts you a little further away. But certainly right in the mix. I think a lot of people do believe that Michigan is going to be a solid team this year and take a step forward from what we saw a year ago.
I think I agree with these rankings for the most part, just in terms of being in that range, that 12 to 15. I don't know that there are more than 14 teams, at least on paper, that I think are as good as this Michigan team can be. Now, like you said, being in that range where they're projected, that probably means you're either just sneaking into the playoff or you're on the outside looking in. And that's kind of what I feel like when we've had these discussions about what our expectations for this fall are. That's kind of the range of outcomes that I feel like is most likely for them to just kind of be on the edge of the playoff, just barely miss. Obviously the things they have in their favor this year is the schedule's a little more forgiving, though you do have 2 more road games. You're going to play 6 at home, 6 on the road. The offense, I think just by virtue of not being last year's offense and having a new coordinator and having a new quarterback to kind of build it around, it's going to be better. We'll see how much better it is. I don't think it would be a surprise if they were much better, but is that going to be good enough for 2 more wins or the 3 more wins that it will take them to be a playoff team? I'm not sure, especially now what we have, there's the Sharon Moore suspension looming. We talked the other day why that might be something that's at least a little bit of a concern early on in the season, especially if you maybe drop that game in week 2 to Oklahoma, which I'm not out here putting in bad energy into the world. Just it's in the range of outcomes. I just feel like with what they have, they're going to be right in the mix there. However, I think you still do likely have a freshman quarterback starting, which comes with its set of lumps here and there, no matter how good he winds up being. The offensive line isn't quite where we think it should be if this team is going to kind of get back to that playoff contention that we had been used to the last few years. And I do think the schedule is tough enough to maybe be on that 3 to 4 win or 3 to 4 loss line by the time the season's over. So, but when it comes to being ranked, anywhere from 12 to, I know Andy Staples is up on screen right now, 17. I think you can make arguments for any of those teams.
It is interesting if you're 12, according to Joel Klatt, and this is always, me, my number one complaint about all these rankings is like a lot of people do go off schedule when I don't think that should be the case. If we're going into a season, how good are the teams, right? And then you figure out the schedule later. But if he is truly going on how good he thinks his team could be, and they do have a schedule that, like you said, right, it's challenging. You got 6 road games, but I don't think it's anywhere near as challenging as last season. Now we'll see, right? The season starts. Last year, Indiana, Illinois didn't look like teams coming into the season that were going to, put up, be a big test for Michigan. Yet they were, as the season played out, and those became very good football teams. One of them making the playoff. And now you're seeing people this year say Illinois last year's Indiana. So we'll see. They're not on Michigan's schedule, but we'll see how.
Which is also not to interrupt. That's also kind of crazy, given that last year's we didn't know Indiana last year was going to be what Indiana was. We thought they'd win 3 or 4 games. This Illinois team that's coming back is pretty good. So I don't think it would be a surprise per se, but if you're talking about a non-name brand school to sneak into the playoff,
right?
Certainly, I think they fit the bill there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is true because Indiana last year it was all new. The reason why Illinois is being looked at as a really good team here and appearing on these top 25s is because of what they have coming back, including at quarterback with Luke Altmaier. But yeah, like let's say Michigan's the 12th best team in the country and their schedule's not that bad. Then maybe they do get in the college football playoff. I did find it interesting. Joel Klatt's reasoning for his optimism on Michigan. He says this is not a ranking that has anything to do with Bryce Underwood. This is defense. This is Sharon Moore. It's philosophy. And he talked a lot about, why he believes in Michigan. And he did talk about the defense. And he kind of pointed to last season and said, what did the offense do when they beat USC, when they beat Ohio State, when they beat Alabama? He said, you know what their offense did? Virtually nothing. And, so if the offense takes a step forward, then you're looking at maybe the ability to beat some of these other teams. And really, there were some winnable games on that schedule last year, but there were also some games that they won that they could have lost. USC, Ohio State, you would put right there. He believes that Wink Martindale has figured out the college game. I think that I agree with that, when it comes to the way that defense kind of struggled maybe to find its footing a little bit in the first half of last season, but then really turned the corner late. And one of the turning points, maybe second half Indiana. But it was something was brewing there. And then what they give up 6 to Northwestern, 10 to Ohio State, and 13 to Alabama in their last 3 games, all victories. And that defense allowed the offense to do virtually nothing other than control the clock late in that Ohio State game, which was huge. And they scored 50 on Northwestern, but they could have won that game, I guess, with just 7 points based on how the defense played. That defense was that good. Now, Anthony, my question to you is, how good will the defense be considering you lose all that top talent, right? They were without Will Johnson at the end of last season. The secondary improved just by nature of other guys stepping up and actually putting guys maybe in some better spots that suit them a little bit better. But you're not going to have the elite defensive tackle play you got last year, and that pretty much won you the Ohio State game. You do have some good transfers you brought in, some guys that are emerging that were already here. Can the defense, they won't have as much pressure on them because the offense will be better, we assume, but can the defense still kind of carry this team if they have to?
I think it can. I think it's going to be a little bit different in that, do you have 2 players at defensive tackle specifically, like last year, that could straight up take over games, take over sequences, change sequences for you? I think Rayshon Benny has some of that in him. Do I think he's going to be a first-round pick like Mason Graham or Kenneth Grant were? No, I don't necessarily. But when you add in a guy like him, who he's one of those classic stories of just a player who's kind of, I won't even say waited in the wings, just you've had elite guys playing ahead of you. I think that he's going to be a huge breakout candidate for this year. We've seen what he's capable of. And then you've got a little more depth there too, where, you might not have 2 guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant where you just say, you're playing, you guys are talented enough to wreck this game on your own. This year, I think for Michigan, it's more, I think your defensive line stays potent throughout games because of the rotation that you're able to bring out there, especially at defensive tackle where you can kind of roll them out there like hockey lines, so to speak. So I think that's going to work in there. It's not a 1-to-1 replacement. It's going to have to look different, similarly to, like I've said a few times, how it looked different after Michigan had to replace David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson.
That'd be a hell of a player.
That'd be a hell of a player. That's a 99 overall right there.
Yeah.
So I think their strength comes through the depth of the rotation. Linebacker wise, I thought those guys, turned a corner about 2/3 of the way through the year. Cornerback, that's a position group we've talked about of maybe being a little bit concerned of not having a true bona fide stud number 1. But then again, you might have a couple guys who could fit that bill at some point. So for me, I think the defense has enough to carry him. And a lot of that is, I get that the bowl game was just 1 game, but we've seen essentially what this team and this defense is going to be, without a few of the pieces that they added in that bowl game. And Alabama played all their guys that day. A lot of guys that wound up getting drafted and a couple that wound up getting drafted pretty early. So I am confident in the defense. I think that Wink did figure it out. It seemed like maybe was it the second half of that Oregon game or maybe the second half of that Indiana game, somewhere in that range.
Probably
Just seems
Oregon.
like a switch kind of flipped for those guys. So I am confident in that. Now, I would have loved to seen last year's defense at full strength with what I think this year's offense is. I mean, then you are probably talking about a
Yeah.
playoff team that wins a couple more games, but I think that they are good enough to kind of carry the load while this offense grows and figures stuff out.
Speaking of Alabama playing a lot of their guys, and like you said, a lot of them were draft picks. Dug up this stat: 12 of the 29 non-Michigan first-round picks played against Michigan last year. They played against almost half of the other first-round picks, and that just shows you how tough that schedule was. So in Michigan beat a lot of those players because they beat Ohio State and Alabama. They lost to the Oregons of the world and those guys, and they had a couple, but in Texas as well had a couple, but no, I couldn't agree more. Like when you look at this defense, maybe the first half of last season, Wink Martindale had a system which was very similar to what Michigan ran in the past. You had your talent, and they kind of rolled out there, and they weren't a finished product yet, and you had your ups and your downs. But then in the second half of the year, it felt like he figured out how to tailor things to the guys that he did have. Okay, Will Johnson's out. Let's move our nickel Zeke Berry out to corner. Let's put Makari Page even further towards the line of scrimmage at nickel because we have a safety and Wesley Walker we think we can start. And he kind of pieced things together. It's not going to look the same, as you said, not a one-to-one comparison. I think that's a good way to put it. But there are going to be pieces that he's going to be able to fit together that I think will work this year based on, the unique personnel that you have this season. In Wink, I trust, I guess, is how I would describe my confidence in him. And then the offense, like we said, like I don't know how exactly, somehow, some way, though, it's just going to be better. It can't be any worse than that if you have better quarterback play, unless, somehow you suffer injury there. But yeah, I think that this is the range that a lot of people see them at. And, as we know, they were in an even higher range at this point last year, and they didn't meet those expectations. So there's a ton of work to do. All that matters is the work they put in and how they end up performing on Saturdays. But I think when a lot of people objectively look at the roster, the pieces, the coaching staff, they feel like this can be a pretty darn good football team. They just have to go out and show it.
And that's the key, is going out there and showing it and putting the pieces together. And like I said, I think that there's an aspect of last year where you just feel like in general that they sort of weathered the storm and got through what appeared to be maybe the most turbulent time of the Sharon Moore era, just with all the change. And you were just so, trying to choose my words carefully here. They just were ill prepared offensively across the board. I think that there was confidence based on guys that they'd seen perform in practices and just running the system they had run. But they were just ill prepared there. And you had a lot of fresh face, a lot of guys on this coaching staff that hadn't coached really at this level before. And I thought wound up doing a pretty darn good job by the time the year was over. So they survived it. It was I think as good a transition year as you can have, especially given what happened in the month of November, where you get Bryce Underwood, you drop a 50 burger from the clouds on Northwestern, you beat Ohio State, you beat Alabama in the bowl game, you sign a pretty darn good recruiting class relative to what they had been the last few years. It's just, now it's critical to just keep the ball rolling. And no one's going to sit here and say that this is a national title contender. Maybe some people will. Some people could be that confident. I'm not there yet, but I think that they have the ingredients at the very least to take a big step forward and win 9 or 10 games this year.